When life feels predictable, when routines are stable, when everything seems under control, most people live inside an invisible bubble of certainty. We assume tomorrow will look like today. We assume our bodies will keep working. We assume the world is safe enough for us to move through it without thinking too much. But all of that collapses the moment fear enters. A diagnosis. A car accident. A sudden threat. A night where the phone rings at 3 a.m. A moment when death stands close enough for us to feel its breath. And something strange happens, something that surprises even the people involved. Many atheists, skeptics, and non-religious individuals suddenly whisper a sentence they've never spoken before. Please, God, help me. They don't believe in God, at least not consciously. They've argued against religion for years. They've told their friends and families that faith is just a psychological crutch. And yet, in the darkest moments, a prayer escapes their lips. Why? Why do humans, including atheists, instinctively reach for something beyond themselves in crisis? Why does the brain shift modes when danger hits? And what exactly happens inside consciousness when a person faces fear, trauma, or the possibility of death? This video explores that mystery, not to judge anyone, not to promote a doctrine, but to understand one of the most fascinating intersections of neuroscience, psychology, and human existence. 1. The instinctive cry for help. Let's begin with a simple observation. Humans call out to something when they feel powerless. Even toddlers who have never been taught about religion instinctively reach upward when they're scared, toward a parent, a protector, someone stronger. But when adults face a fear so overwhelming that no human can intervene, a violent accident, a medical emergency, a near-death moment, the mind reaches upward again. The cry becomes universal. Someone, help me. Not necessarily the God of organized religion. Not the God of a specific church or tradition. But a someone. A presence. A higher source of safety. And what we call prayer, in these moments is not always a theological act. Often, it's the mind's final attempt to reach beyond the limits of human control. 2. The brain under threat. A shift into survival mode. To understand this instinct, we have to look at what fear does to the human brain. When a person encounters danger, the amygdala fires first, the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats. The amygdala then sends a shockwave through the body, activating adrenaline, cortisol, rapid heartbeat, tightened muscles, tunnel vision. But the most fascinating part happens not in the amygdala, but in the default mode network, the system linked to identity, meaning, and a sense of self. During crisis, parts of this network become unstable. The feeling of control over one's life collapses. The sense of autonomy dissolves. And humans do not tolerate the feeling of absolute powerlessness. So the mind looks for an anchor, something stronger than the self. This is where the possibility of prayer emerges. 3. Why even non-believers pray. Psychologists call this phenomenon situational theism. It describes people who do not hold a consistent religious belief, but who turn to a higher power under intense stress. This behavior has been documented in soldiers in life-threatening combat, atheists during turbulence on airplanes, non-religious patients during severe illness, people trapped in accidents, individuals witnessing sudden violence. In dozens of studies, participants admitted that even though they didn't believe in God on normal days, they spontaneously cried out to someone when they thought they were going to die. Why does this happen? Because humans are meaning-seeking beings. When the mind confronts the possibility of annihilation, the end of consciousness, it searches desperately for connection and hope. Even if the person thinks of God as impossible, the instinctive part of the brain responds differently. It says, if there is any help out there, I need it right now. This is not hypocrisy. It is humanity. 4. The emotional brain overpowers the rational brain. Under normal circumstances, many atheists base their worldview on logic, evidence, or philosophical reasoning. But during trauma, the prefrontal cortex, the center of logic and rationality, becomes partially offline. Meanwhile, The emotional brain becomes dominant. The result? A person may behave in ways that contradict their usual worldview. Fear, after all, has the power to bypass ideology. In the same way that a rational person screams in terror, a calm person becomes paralyzed. A self-described lone wolf desperately calls someone they love. Even an atheist may instinctively pray. The mind falls back on its deepest biological patterns, reaching for protection, connection, and hope. 5. Trauma amplifies the feeling of being small. In daily life, we all construct a sense of being in control. We choose our routines. We make our decisions. We build our identities. We feel, at least somewhat, in charge of our lives. But trauma destroys that illusion instantly. Suddenly, everything we built feels fragile. Everything we trusted feels unstable. Everything we planned seems irrelevant. And in that moment, the self feels very small. Smallness creates a psychological space where a person becomes open to possibilities they previously rejected, including transcendent help. This is when the quiet whisper emerges. Please, anyone, hear me? And this whisper, in its essence, is the seed of prayer. 6. The psychology of the final moment. When a person believes they might die, something profound happens inside consciousness. Time slows. Memories sharpen. The mind becomes intensely focused on what matters most. Psychologists call this mortality salience, the state where the reality of death becomes impossible to ignore. And in that state, many people enter what researchers call existential openness. It means you become open to ideas you normally reject. You reach for sources of meaning beyond yourself. You search for a sense of continuity beyond death. In other words, the door to transcendence cracks open. That doesn't mean a person suddenly adopts a new religion. But they may reach for something that feels bigger, steadier, more enduring than their own fragile life. This helps explain why atheists pray in crisis. They're not suddenly converting. Instead, their inner world is widening under extreme pressure. The mind is searching not for doctrine, but for stability. 7. The evolutionary argument. Why humans call out in danger. Some anthropologists say the instinct to prey during danger is deeply connected to our evolutionary past. Thousands of years ago, humans lived in environments full of predators, diseases, and natural disasters. Survival required cooperation, hierarchy, trust in a leader, belief in unseen forces, rituals for protection. Calling out to a higher power may have been a survival mechanism, a way to reduce panic, maintain group cohesion, and create psychological resilience. Even if someone no longer believes in a deity, the instinct remains buried in the brain's older structures. So when fear hits, the modern worldview might say, God doesn't exist. But the ancient brain says, call out, reach upward, don't face this alone. This is why prayer often emerges before conscious thought, faster than logic can intervene. 8. Why the mind looks for someone instead of something. You'll notice something interesting. People rarely cry out to the universe during a car crash. They don't shout, energy, help me. They don't say, natural forces, save me. They reach for a someone, not a something. Why? Because relationships are the core of human survival. From infancy to old age, humans depend on connectedness. And in crisis, the mind seeks the ultimate form of relationship. A conscious source of help stronger than any human. Even atheists who reject the idea of a personal God may still find themselves calling out to a you, not an it. This tells us something profound. The human mind doesn't simply want safety. It wants presence. It wants a listener, a responder, a protector. Prayer, even when instinctive or momentary, reveals our deepest relational wiring. 9. The collapse of control and the search for meaning. Most of human life is built around the illusion of control. We control our schedules. We control our goals. We control our image. We control our relationships. We control our future. Or at least, we think we do. But crisis strips all of that away. Suddenly, control becomes impossible. And when control dies, meaning becomes essential. The mind desperately needs a framework to understand what's happening, not intellectually, but emotionally. Prayer becomes a way of asking, does my life still matter? Is there something beyond the chaos? Am I alone in this suffering? Even atheists who dismiss organized religion still care deeply about meaning. And meaning, in its deepest form, often carries a spiritual dimension, even if unnamed. 10. The silence of the rational mind. During crisis, another fascinating shift happens. The voice of doubt becomes quiet. Not permanently, but momentarily. The person who normally thinks religion is irrational, prayer is pointless, God is a human invention, may find those thoughts fading into the background. Fear compresses consciousness. Only the essential remains. And in moments stripped of distraction, a person confronts the raw question. What if there is something beyond me? This question is not a conversion. It is a human response to vulnerability. The strict lines between belief and non-belief temporarily blur. The person is not turning religious, they're turning human. 11. Trauma and the feeling of being witnessed. One of the most fascinating insights from trauma psychology is this. People under extreme stress often report a feeling that someone is watching. This is not paranoia. It's a deep-seated perception that emerges when the mind seeks external support. It explains phenomena such as soldiers sensing an unseen companion, climbers feeling guided during near-death situations, patients sensing a presence during surgery, survivors of accidents feeling held by something. Atheists experience these sensations too. Not as proof of divine reality, but as part of the brain's attempt to regain stability. Prayer, then, becomes a natural extension of this psychological process. When you feel watched, you speak. When you feel accompanied, you reach out. When you sense presence, even faintly, the heart responds. 12. Crisis breaks the walls we build around ourselves. People build emotional walls. I don't need anyone. I rely only on myself. I decide my own destiny. But fear cracks those walls. Trauma shatters them. Death tears them down completely. And behind those walls, the human heart is not as self-sufficient as we pretend. It is tender. It is afraid. It longs for connection. It longs for help. It longs for assurance. Prayer appears in crisis because it aligns perfectly with the human condition when all pretenses fall away. It is the expression of vulnerability without shame. The raw voice of a soul no longer hiding. 13. Near-death experiences and the mind's reorientation. While this video is not about proving or disproving near-death experiences, NDEs, it's worth noting one thing. Countless atheists who undergo NDEs describe something unexpected. Not necessarily visions. Not necessarily religious imagery. But a deep, overwhelming sense of connection, presence, awareness, peace, transcendence. Even when their worldview rejects all spiritual categories. What's happening? Under extreme threat, the brain shifts from its usual way of organizing experience into a radically different mode. One where the boundaries between self and the transcendent become porous. From a scientific perspective, this could be the brain trying to reduce terror, a defense mechanism against overwhelming pain, altered neurochemistry, or a final neurological attempt to create coherence. But from a psychological perspective, NDEs reveal something crucial. When death feels close, the mind reaches for meaning automatically. It doesn't ask permission from your belief system. It doesn't wait for philosophical debates. It moves instinctively toward transcendence. This sets the stage for spontaneous prayer, even in people who claim they have no spiritual reflexes at all. 14. The moment logic gives way to desire. We tend to think that humans act based on what they believe. But in moments of terror, humans act based on what they desire, what they long for, what they hope might be true, even if they don't intellectually accept it. So the atheist who says, "I know there is no God," may still whisper, "But please, if anyone is there, save me." This moment is less about ideology and more about honesty. Fear strips away intellectual armor. Trauma reveals what a person wants rather than what they think. Underneath layers of logic and skepticism, there is a universal longing. I don't want this to be the end. Prayer becomes a voice for that longing. 15. Why, please God, feels natural in crisis. When people suddenly pray during a crisis, they are not usually thinking about theology, doctrine, denominations, metaphysics, philosophical consistency. They are speaking a phrase deeply embedded in the culture and the human emotional vocabulary. Please, God, is not always a religious act. Sometimes, it is a cry for help, a cry for meaning, a cry for comfort, a cry for survival, a cry for connection, a cry for hope. Even atheists who never attended church or read scripture often grew up in environments where God is the word assigned to the highest possible source of help. So in crisis, the mind reaches for the strongest word it knows. And that word is often God. 16. The mind's search for the ultimate listener. One of the most neglected aspects of prayer is this. Prayer assumes someone is listening. Even a desperate, instinctive, half-conscious prayer is addressed to a listener, a presence capable of hearing. This is psychologically profound. Humans do not simply want escape from pain. They want to be heard in their pain. The atheist who prays in crisis is not betraying their worldview. They are honoring their humanity. They are expressing the most basic emotional truth. I can't carry this alone. Whether or not they believe in a divine listener, the desire to be heard is universal. And in that desire, prayer emerges naturally. 17. The collapse of the ego. Throughout life, the ego tells a simple story. I am in control. But when an event threatens life itself, the ego breaks. The illusion of control dissolves. The sense of independence collapses. And when the ego collapses, the deeper layers of the self rise to the surface. Fear, dependence, longing, vulnerability, hope. Prayer comes from these deeper layers, not from the ego. And not from philosophical arguments. This explains why even hardened skeptics, when faced with death, may find themselves praying for the first time in decades. Prayer does not come from certainty. It comes from brokenness. 18. Trauma and the reawakening of childhood reflexes. When people face overwhelming danger, the brain sometimes reactivates reflexes formed in childhood. Reaching upward, calling for a parent, seeking protection, wanting to be held. In many cultures, children are taught language about God long before they can analyze it. So the childhood reflex might have been, God, please help me. These early emotional imprints do not disappear simply because someone becomes an adult or adopts atheism. Under extreme stress, the adult consciousness may collapse into the older, deeper templates of safety, including the reflex of prayer. It's not a conversion. It's a regression to the oldest emotional memory of protection. 19. The mystery of last-minute belief. Doctors, emergency responders, and hospice workers often report a phenomenon that they still struggle to explain. People who lived their whole lives without religion often cry out to God near death. Not because they suddenly become convinced of doctrine. Not because someone preached to them. But because the final moments of life reveal something that everyday consciousness hides. The terror of non-existence. The longing for continuity. The desire for meaning. The hope for companionship beyond death. No matter how rational or skeptical a person is, the emotional brain tends to dominate when mortality becomes undeniable. And in that state, prayer is one of the few remaining languages capable of expressing the complexity of the moment. 20. Crisis creates a temporary spiritual window. Here is one of the most important insights. When someone who normally rejects spirituality begins to pray in a crisis, they are not contradicting themselves. They are entering a temporary state where the boundaries of self expand. The horizon of meaning widens. The emotional brain overpowers the rational brain. The instinct for transcendence awakens. This window may last seconds, minutes, or hours. It may fade as soon as safety returns. Or it may lead to deeper reflection later. But during that window, the mind becomes capable of asking questions it never dared ask in ordinary life. Questions like, what if there is something more? What if I'm not alone? What if existence isn't just random? What if help could come from beyond? Again, these are not conversions. They are openings. Windows into the deeper structure of human consciousness. 21. When the body is breaking down, the mind reaches upward. There's something striking about human biology. When the body feels like it is failing, the mind instinctively reaches upward, not downward, not inward, but outward and beyond. This upward-reaching reflex appears across cultures, continents, and belief systems. Scientists theorize that in overwhelming danger, the body's stress response peaks. Emotional centers override cognitive centers, and the search for external rescue intensifies. From a purely biological perspective, this reflex may have evolved to maximize survival. A person crying out is more likely to receive help from others. A person expressing fear signals the need for protection. A person calling upward unites the group around a single point of focus. But from a psychological and existential perspective, the upward gesture, physical or verbal, carries deeper meaning. It reflects the human need for a source of help beyond human limits. Even atheists experience this upward pull, especially when their lives feel at risk. This creates the perfect environment for spontaneous prayer. 22. The mind cannot endure meaningless suffering. Humans can endure enormous physical pain. They can endure loss, tragedy, hardship, and defeat. But what they cannot endure is suffering that feels meaningless. When tragedy strikes, the first question isn't, how do I fix this? It's, why is this happening? Humans are wired to search for meaning even before they search for solutions. Atheists, like all people, feel the crushing weight of meaninglessness during trauma. And prayer, even if spontaneous and skeptical, becomes a way of asking the universe, is there meaning here? Does my suffering matter to anyone? Does anyone see what I'm going through? Prayer becomes a bridge between chaos and coherence. Not a religious act, a human one. 23. When you have no one else to ask. In crisis, one of the most painful realizations is, there is nothing more anyone can do. Doctors reach their limits. Loved ones stand helpless. No human hand can stop what is happening. This is the moment true isolation sets in. The moment a person realizes they're facing something alone. Atheist or believer, the mind resists this ultimate solitude. So it reaches. It reaches for anything that might hear. Anything that might intervene. Anything that might comfort. Even if the person thinks no such being exists. The longing for connection pushes the mind to express what it most needs. Please, don't let this be the end. That sentence, in its rawness, is a prayer. 24. The emotional truth beneath intellectual position. Atheists who pray in crisis are often accused of being inconsistent. But this accusation misunderstands something fundamental about the human mind. Intellectual positions and emotional truths do not always align. You can intellectually reject the supernatural and emotionally long for help from beyond. You can logically conclude life is random and emotionally hope your life has meaning. You can argue that consciousness ends at death and emotionally fear that it might not. Crisis forces these emotional truths to the surface, truths that daily life hides under routines and habits. Prayer reveals the emotional architecture beneath the rational facade. 25. Death makes the mind ask forbidden questions. Most people, atheists and believers alike, avoid thinking about death. It is uncomfortable, destabilizing, and difficult to confront. But when death feels close, the mind changes rules. Questions once dismissed become urgent. What happens to me when I stop breathing? Is there anything beyond this life? Will I ever see the people I love again? Is this really the end? These questions are not religious. They're existential. And prayer becomes a way of holding these questions without collapsing into despair. A way of saying, I don't know what's out there. But help me if something is. 26. Why people who never pray suddenly become honest. Many atheists admit that when they pray in crisis, the prayer feels different from the prayers they heard growing up. It is not formal, not rehearsed, not poetic, not doctrinal. It is brutally honest. I'm scared. I don't want to die. I don't want to leave my family. Please save me. This honesty is one of the most profound aspects of crisis prayer. It strips away performance, philosophy, pride, public image, intellectual defenses. The prayer is not meant for religion or for spectators. It is the heart speaking its truth with nothing to hide. And honesty, at its deepest level, is always spiritual. 27. Crisis prayer is not proof of belief, but proof of humanity. It is crucial to clarify. A sudden prayer in crisis does not prove that an atheist secretly believes in God. What it proves is, humans are vulnerable. Humans desire protection. Humans long for meaning. Humans fear death. Humans reach for connection. Humans hope for safety. Prayer in crisis is not a theological statement. It is a confession of human need. It is an emotional instinct, not a metaphysical conclusion. But it also reveals something important. Despite differences in worldview, humans share the same emotional core, a core that cries out when everything familiar collapses. 28. The surprising aftermath. Why some atheists reflect differently after crisis. One of the most interesting phenomena documented in psychology is what happens after an atheist survives a traumatic event. Not in the moment of fear, but days, weeks, or months later. Some simply forget the prayer. Others dismiss it as panic. But a significant number quietly reflect on it. They ask themselves, why did I say that? Why did I reach for something I don't believe exists? What part of me was speaking? Was that just instinct, or something deeper? For some, the prayer becomes a catalyst for introspection. Not conversion, but questioning. Questioning the limits of human understanding. Questioning the nature of consciousness. Questioning whether materialism fully explains the human experience. Questioning why fear opens the door to transcendence so naturally. These reflections shape the final part of our journey. 29. The thin line between psychology and spirituality. At this point in the video, something becomes clear. The line between psychological instinct and spiritual intuition is extremely thin. When a person prays in crisis, are they activating a survival mechanism? Expressing a deep emotional need? Regressing to childhood conditioning? Or touching something real beyond themselves? Science explains some of the mechanisms. Psychology explains the emotional structures. Neurology explains the brain's responses. But none of these fully answer the ultimate questions. Why do humans long for transcendence? Why does prayer feel natural when death is near? Why do we sense presence when we are most vulnerable? These questions sit at the frontier between mind and mystery. And in the final part of this video, we explore that frontier. 30. The unnamed sense of more. There is a strange and persistent feature of the human mind. When it is pushed to its limits, physically, emotionally, or existentially, it often senses that reality is larger than it appeared. Even people who confidently reject religion sometimes describe a feeling of presence, a sense of being held, an intuition that they are not alone, a mysterious wave of peace in the middle of chaos. These experiences do not fit neatly into categories like atheism or theism. They belong to a deeper human realm, the realm of intuition, longing, and mystery. In crisis, this realm opens, and prayer becomes its language. 31. The mind reaches for hope the way the lungs reach for air. One of the most revealing truths about crisis prayer is this: hope is not optional. Hope is a survival instinct. When danger threatens life itself, the mind demands hope the way the lungs demand oxygen. Even a fragile, uncertain, desperate hope. Even a hope spoken to the unknown. Even a hope whispered in the dark. Please, let me live. This plea is not theological. It is existential. And existential hope naturally transforms into prayer. 32. Facing death creates a desire for continuity. Whether religious or secular, Humans struggle to accept the idea of simply ceasing to exist. The end of consciousness feels unnatural, as if something within us resists it. This resistance shapes the prayers of many atheists in crisis. Don't let this be the end. Let me see my family again. Give me more time. The desire for continuity, for life to continue beyond the breaking point, is not a sign of religious weakness. It is a sign of the depth of the human spirit. A sign that the self longs to persist. That love longs to endure. That meaning wants to survive death. Prayer flows from this longing. 33. Prayer as the final language of vulnerability. When a person is stripped of everything, strength, certainty, identity, control, only one thing remains: vulnerability. This vulnerability is not a flaw. It is one of the deepest truths of being human. And prayer is the language vulnerability speaks. A language beyond logic. A language beyond philosophy. A language beyond belief. It is the voice of the heart when the mind reaches its limits. Even if someone never prays again after the crisis, the moment reveals something profound. When humans are most real, most honest, and most exposed, they reach for connection. They reach for meaning. They reach for something more. 34. The unexpected grace of being human. There is a quiet beauty in the fact that an atheist might pray in crisis. Not because it proves the existence of God, and not because it discredits their worldview, but because it reveals the softness beneath every human life. It shows that beneath the arguments, beneath the identities, beneath the labels, we all share the same fragile heart. A heart that aches. A heart that fears. A heart that hopes. A heart that cries out when pushed to the edge. Prayer in crisis is not a contradiction. It is a mirror, reflecting the deepest truth of the human condition. 35. So what does this mean? This video is not here to tell you what to believe. Instead, it invites you to see what crisis reveals. Humans long for protection. Humans long for connection. Humans long for meaning. Humans long for hope. Humans long to be heard. Humans long not to face death alone. These longings do not belong to any religion. They belong to humanity itself. Prayer, even sudden, instinctive, unbelieving prayer, is one expression of these longings. So when an atheist prays in crisis, it is not a failure of skepticism. It is a moment where the emotional truth of being human speaks louder than intellectual certainty. 36. The open question. Is this instinct just biology, or something more? Science offers explanations for why crisis triggers prayer. Survival instincts. Defensive neurological responses. Emotional regulation. Evolutionarily preserved behaviors. Cultural conditioning. All of these are real. But they do not close the case. Because the instinct to reach beyond oneself in crisis could also point to something deeper. A spiritual dimension in consciousness. An unseen order we intuit but cannot measure. A transcendent presence woven into human experience. A relational structure at the heart of reality. A longing that comes from something real. The truth is simple. We don't yet know. And acknowledging that we don't know is not weakness. It is honesty. Crisis prayer sits at the doorway between psychology and transcendence. A doorway every human stands before at least once in life. 37. The final reflection. What happens when the mind breaks open? When atheists pray in crisis, something remarkable is happening. The mind is breaking open. Breaking open to vulnerability. Breaking open to mystery. Breaking open to the possibility that the universe is larger than it seemed during normal life. This doesn't force belief. It doesn't erase skepticism. It doesn't settle the debate between religion and secularism. But it does reveal something sacred about the human experience. When life hangs by a thread, the heart reaches for meaning. And when the heart reaches for meaning, it often speaks in the language of prayer. Whether that prayer echoes into emptiness, or into something, or someone, is a question each person must face for themselves. But the instinct to pray remains one of the most profound and mysterious signs of what it means to be human. In the end, this video is not about proving anything. But understanding something. Understanding why we pray in crisis. Understanding what fear does to the human mind. Understanding the emotional and spiritual architecture hidden beneath our daily routines. Understanding the mystery inside every person, believer or atheist, when they stand face to face with mortality. And perhaps the most important truth of all. When crisis strips us down to our core, we discover that beneath every worldview, beneath every identity, beneath every label, there is a shared humanity that longs for hope. And in that longing, we are far more alike than we realize.